With the release of the Valis Undermined update came a lot of really good things, especially a little something called the Arbucep.
Ooh, hello.
Just like my initial thoughts around Nokko, I was skeptical before, but oh man, I truly have not given this Archgun enough credit. It's extremely fun to use, deals filthy amounts of damage, and honestly has made me fall in love with using Archguns as a staple weapon in my builds. And in this video, we shall see exactly why it should be in yours too. So without further ado, let us begin. The Arbucep is Nokko's signature Archgun and is quite unique as far as Archguns go. It's a rocket launcher that fires 6 homing projectiles that each inflict one of the secondary elemental types, which includes blast, corrosive, magnetic, radiation, and even viral. Oh, and let's not forget about gas. Essentially, the alchemy game mode all wrapped up in one delicious package. The secondary elements that each volley deals are separate from the base elements that we can mod for. So, if you mod for corrosive and heat, for example, it will then add that onto each of the volley's damage alongside their respective element, but will then stack onto the volleys that deal corrosive, for example. Each volley will then apply their own set of status effects, including the ones that we've modded for. Being Nokko's signature Archgun, if you fire the projectiles at his mushrooms, it will invigorate them and cause them to pulse with increased effect, in the same way that his spore springs do. This unique effect can even extend to his subsumed ability, Bright Bonnet. If you subsume Bright Bonnet onto another frame, it will cap your ability strength increase at 100%. But if you whip out the Arbucep and fire it at said shroom, it will then go past that cap. A big thank you for someone in my comments for making mention of this synergy, because this one is golden advice. Unlike most other weapons, any additional multi-shot that we put onto Arbucep will instead be converted to more damage instead of more projectiles. But this damage bonus is multiplicative to other damage sources and actually makes quite a big difference to its damage. As for some of the base stats, the Arbucep comes in with a 10% base crit chance, which is painfully low and thus won't scale very well if you pop in crit chance mods. Although its critical damage multiplier comes in at 2.9 times at base, which is pretty respectable. Crit aside, the base status chance is really good, at 34.9% exactly, which seriously bothers me why it couldn't be rounded up to 35%, but it is what it is. The Arbucep's projectiles have a homing function. As good as this sounds, I find we can't completely control where each projectile will go unless there is a single target in front of us. It almost does a half lock-on thing similar to the Larkspur, but I found that you have to actually be aiming at a target most of the time for it to actually work. That said, the radial damage from the projectile's explosions will also apply status effects and deal damage to nearby enemies, which makes this not so little spore slinger phenomenal for larger groups of enemies or just really tight tile sets. Alrighty, if you haven't yet been able to get your hands on this beauty, whether by farming it the old-fashioned way or spending your hard-earned plat on it, or swiping your credit card, you can get all of the necessary parts from the newly added Nightcap bounties in Fortuna, or you can just buy them from Nightcap if you get really unlucky. However, this does require the completion of the new war quest before you can access all of this though. But once you start doing the bounties, I found that the Arbucep parts dropped fairly frequently, so it shouldn't take you too long. Plus, the tile set is really quick to do. Before we move on to the builds, I want to talk about Primary Crux, and this is for a reason. Primary Crux works very well on weapons that have a high status chance or tend to stack up a lot of status effects really quickly, which is something that the Arbucep is really good at. Aside from the increased status chance, it also provides ammo efficiency, which again is really good on the Arbucep because this thing will shred through a magazine pretty quickly. However, there is a catch. Primary Crux requires weak point hits to reliably proc it and keep the effect up. If you don't manage to get any hits and the cooldown runs out, you will lose all of the stacks that you have accumulated. That isn't an issue for most weapons, but with the Arbucep, it is a whole different kettle of fish. I tested this thing in multiple missions, the simulacrum, etc., and I found that because the projectiles are relatively difficult to control, the Arbucep doesn't reliably proc crux enough for me to consider it a solid arcane. I'm not saying it's not a good arcane on the Arbucep, as when it works extremely well and allows you to keep a magazine going for much longer, and also adds a metric ton of status chance onto a gun that already deals substantial status damage as it is. That said, I found that Crux worked better against enemies like the Corpus, which have naturally large weak points to hit, but against something like the Grenier with their pea-sized heads, or even worse, the Murmur, that's where the problem lies. And in Archwing missions, Crux struggles as well because it's even harder to actually hit those weak points. If you want to proc Crux somewhat effectively, firing in the air just above the target can potentially cause more weak point hits, but again, this is better suited to certain factions. If all of that doesn't bother you, then by all means, put Crux on your Arbucep. It is still a great arcane when it works. With that out of the way, it's time for everyone's favorite section, the builds. And what better one to start with than the one and only Status Hose. As you've probably guessed, this build is focused on stacking as many status procs as we can squeeze out of this thing, which the Arbucep has no issue with. I chose to run with the good old heat corrosive combo here as our elements of choice, alongside the other elements that come with the Arbucep, of course. Arcanes wise, I went with primary frostbite for the sole purpose of the additional multi-shot, because in Arbucep's case, multi-shot is converted to multiplicative damage instead of more projectiles, which is quite a nice damage increase. We don't care too much about the crit damage in this version. In order for us to reliably proc Frostbite and keep it up as much as possible, we can make use of a Sentinel companion with Artax. Why Artax over anything else, you say? Because no matter what we choose to mod for, the Artax has an innate 20% cold damage that is completely separate from anything else that you mod onto it. Slap on Contagious Bond in your build as well as Shivering Contagion on your Artax and you're good to go. Then we have Cascadia Flare. This is in here for flat damage as we will stack up a lot of heat procs really quickly, so this will help further buff our damage more than something like Primary Merciless would. Mods wise, we have Mark Target for a hefty increased status chance while aiming. After everything is put together, our status chance will be 97.7%, so Mark Target will help us push beyond that. Dual rounds, or if you have it, primed dual rounds, is a huge bonus for the Arbucep because of the multi-shot bonus. Initially I had Sabot rounds in the build, but then I realized that punch through doesn't really impact Arbucep's projectiles, so I swapped it out for deadly efficiency. The 120% damage bonus upon reload is great for the Arbucep because you will pretty much have it up all the time because of how fast you go through a magazine. All of this results in a metric ton of status effects on enemies that is extremely satisfying to see and also rips through most content with ease. And here is a second build for you to try if you wanted something a little different. This one is, ironically, going the crit route by way of secondary innovate, which will help us take care of the Arbucep's atrocious base crit chance. As for the mods, we don't change too much. We just simply swap deadly efficiency for hollowed bullets, which will push our crit multiplier up to 5.2 times, which is pretty decent. The critical damage bonus from primary frostbite will be of even more use to us here due to innovate, and we will still apply a bunch of status effects because of Mark Target. And that's it for the Arbucep. Thank you so much for watching to the end. If I missed something, or if there are any weird and wonderful synergies that you found while using the Arbucep, feel free to put your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. It goes way further than you think. Until next time, stay safe, Tenno, and I shall see you in the next one.